we accomplish the translation of private to public addresses with network address translation, or NAT for short. And there's different versions of NAT that are available to us. So it all depends on what we are trying to accomplish, what our business needs are. For example, static NAT is a one-to-one address mapping. What this means is that we have a private IP address that's mapped to a specific public address. And it's only that private address that can use that particular public address based on that mapping. Nobody else can. Well, this doesn't solve the scarcity problem when it comes to IPv4. Because if I have 1,000 users in our organization and I'm using static NAT, which is one-to-one mappings, what happens? Well, it means I'm going to need 1,000 public IP addresses, and my service provider is not going to give that to me. So therefore, the public IP addresses I do have, let's say I have 6, that means out of the 1,000 users, only 6 can be accessing the internet at any given time based on the static mappings I have defined. And if another user wants to access the internet, then I have to remap the static addressing. So what might we use static NAT for? If we have devices that need that one-to-one mapping, and it will never change. For example, let's say we have a web server or a file server, and we want a specific private to public mapping, and we always want it to be that. No other device will ever use that particular IP address. Well, in that case, there's static NAT to accomplish our goal. However, with static NAT, we are responsible for the configuration. So therefore, we want to utilize a dynamic NAT in cases where we do not want to manually control every single IP address that is translated. So with dynamic NAT, we are dealing with a pool of addresses instead. I might have a pool of public addresses and a pool of private addresses. And that pool of private addresses would be the addresses on your internal network that you want to have translated. And the pool of public addresses are those global addresses that have been given to you by your internet service provider. So with dynamic NAT now, we are going to have still a one-to-one relationship, meaning that if at this point in time, this user wants to access the internet, they will use this specific public IP address, and it's dynamically assigned to them at that point in time. If another user wants to access the internet, they will use a different public IP address from the pool. So if we only have 6 public IP addresses assigned to us from our service provider, what does that mean in the grand scheme of things? It means that we can only have 6 users at any given time accessing the internet. However, it's a dynamic assignment, so therefore, if one user is no longer accessing the internet, then that public address is now available for someone else to use. So the translations happen dynamically, on the fly. But in most cases, we're going to have well over 1,000 users, potentially, in a site, in our organization. And they're all going to need access to the internet at the exact same time. And this is where PAT comes along to save the day. Port address translation. Now, this is a feature of network address translation. And this feature allows us to have multiple private IP addresses sharing the exact same public IP addresses. And this is accomplished through an IP address and port mapping. So not only are they keeping track of the IP addresses that are being translated, the router, through its network address translation process, is keeping track of the port number as well, so it knows which packet is translated for who, so when the traffic comes back from the server or back from the internet, it knows how to translate it properly to send it to the correct user, correct device inside the organization. Because remember, they're all using the same public IP address here. And as a result, there's got to be some way to keep track of which packet has to go back to whom.